Hello and welcome to the video. Over the last few months I've made 4 trips. I've flown British Airways from Heathrow to Corfu, I've flown easyJet from Gatwick to Gibraltar, I've flown Ryanair from Stanstead to Cologne, and I've flown Wizz Air from Gatwick down to Tenerife. All the videos I made about those trips are linked in the description below. In these unprecedented times, I thought there'd be value in making a summary video about those experiences. I should make it clear that every trip I made was to a place that was on the travel corridor list, and that each country allowed UK visitors in without restrictions. That meant that I haven't had to take any tests or undertake any quarantine or self-isolation on any of these trips. In this first video I'll compare the airlines that I travelled on and also provide some top tips for travellers. In my second video I'll look at the airports that I travelled through, as well as sharing some thoughts on the countries that I visited. I'll also give some advice to government as, spoiler alert, the UK didn't feel particularly joined up. Hopefully these videos will be moot very quickly as the vaccine cavalry crests the nearest hill, but I hope these videos will be interesting and helpful either way. So stick around!
Hi, I'm Matt. Over the last 25 years, I've travelled a lot. I've lived in 5 countries on 4 continents. I've flown over 1.3 million miles. I've visited over 100 countries, every American state, but I'm nowhere near done. So hit subscribe and perhaps you'll pick up some hacks, hints and tips to make your next trip better.
I'll split the airline experience into 3 parts: boarding, the in-flight service, and then disboarding, disembark, getting off. I'll talk about the ground experience when I cover the airports that I travelled through. I'll also not talk in detail about hygiene. All airlines claim to have increased their hygiene regimens, although that's very difficult to validate as a consumer. Except for easyJets, all the planes I travelled on were very new, a result of airlines mothballing their older, less efficient planes in favour of the new, efficient ones. All the planes I travelled on were clean and in good condition. So, boarding. British Airways has suspended its priority boarding benefit and boarded strictly by row, starting at the rear, although they did still allow early boarding for passengers needing more time. BA does not sell priority boarding, so there's no direct economic impact to them from that change. Greece appeared to have pushed responsibility for completing a passenger locator form to the airline, which meant that I couldn't check in online and ended up getting a paper boarding pass at the airport. That wasn't ideal, as it's another physical thing to handle, which could be a pathway for transmission. It did slow down the boarding process as well, as BA was very anxious to ensure all passengers were compliant, I assume to avoid a fine from the Greek government. BA gives a hygiene pack on boarding, containing hand sanitizer and a wipe, although on the outbound flight this pack was being manufactured via a just-in-time process in the galley, which may not be the most hygienic way to create a hygiene pack. Hello. I was sat up the back and was one of the first on. Very similar on the return flight, although the hygiene packs were pre-prepared. Both flights were fairly full, but the process worked well and, dare I say it, was perhaps a more efficient way of boarding than the usual method. easyJet sells priority boarding and had decided to retain that income stream, although, on my outbound flight at least, not many had paid for it. The plane ended up being quite full, and as everybody boarded through the front door on that occasion, there was quite a lot of crossover, although as I was one of the first in the general boarding group, it was not really an issue for me. No hygiene packs. On our return flight, both doors were available, and as I was slower to board, I had the sort of boarding experience you'd have had before all of this, with lots of passenger interaction. Ryanair attaches priority boarding to baggage purchases, but passengers are then commingled on the air bridge until the plane is ready to board, so that benefit is largely diluted. As I discussed in my video about that flight, Ryanair buffers passengers to optimise their processes, so no attempt was made to board passengers in a way that minimised crossover. Not a particularly efficient boarding process now or in normal times. Wizz Air also sells priority boarding as part of a baggage package, and for the long flight to Tenerife, I think perhaps 60% or more of passengers had taken that option, which does somewhat undermine the exclusivity of the benefit. Wizz also buffers passengers on the air bridge, so given that priority seats are distributed through the plane, there was no effective attempt to stream passengers on. Quite a full flight too. So, to the in-flight experience. Firstly, and most significantly, all airlines required masks to be worn for the full duration of the flight. This was well observed and was backed up by reminders over the PA and nudges by the crew if they spotted a mask that had slipped off the nose. Planes have a very efficient air filtration system, and according to a recent National Geographic article, the air on a plane is accepted to be much cleaner than the air in restaurants, bars, stores or your friend's living room. So wearing a mask on board is the single most significant transmission control precaution, and anything after that is probably of marginal significance. Although a lot of marginally significant things can cumulatively be significant, so I will look at the small details. BA offered all economy passengers a snack pack and has suspended all further service. This was actually an improvement in service for many economy passengers, particularly for passengers too stingy to overpay for packets of Percy pigs. No duty free, no magazines, and very limited other interaction with the crew, although you could convince them to give additional water if you needed it. This was the most aggressive approach taken to the situation by the airlines I used, which produced the greatest difference from the normal experience, although the free snack pack meant that in one regard at least, the experience was improved. easyJet had no in-flight magazine, but unlike BA, did still offer an in-flight food and beverage service. We were invited to download the menu before takeoff.
Due to the current health precautions, we are unable to offer any in-flight brochures today.
But the announcement to do so came while we were still boarding, so would have been missed by most. There was an attempt to explain the offering whilst in flight, but it's a tricky thing to do and was not hugely successful. It was a 3-hour flight to Gibraltar, so a second service passed through, plus a third pass with duty-free goods. Ryanair has no in-flight magazine in normal times, so their in-flight offering is quite narrow and is communicated by advertising on the back of the seat and communication from the crew. This was a shorter flight than the others that I took, but there was still a service which, apart from the crew wearing face masks, was normal. There was also a scratch card round on the return flight. Wizz also offered an effectively full service and was the only airline to maintain an in-flight magazine to communicate that offering. I'm still not clear on what this clean paper is. The flight was over 4 hours long, so I'm not sure it's realistic or even responsible to not offer customers any refreshments, in which case I suppose they might as well be selling the stuff. This boarding follows the trends I've already shown. BA strictly enforced a row-by-row strategy, which was effective, although as there's no risk to a passenger in row 20 from the actions of a passenger in row 5, I'm not sure how much benefit this approach gives in reality. easyJet also tried to stream passengers off by row, although their passengers were a little less compliant. Good marks for effort though. Ryanair made no attempt to control passengers after landing. It was a good, old-fashioned, pre-pandemic bundle for the door. Wizz Air too was a free-for-all once the ding-dong dinged. So, to conclude, no activity during this pandemic is going to be completely safe, unless you lock yourself away in your house with enough food to last you until all of this is over. Air travel is not completely safe, but it is probably as safe or safer than many of the activities that people are undertaking, such as going to bars or restaurants or travelling on public transport. All airlines were very diligent in enforcing the single most important factor in controlling transmission, which was wearing a mask. Beyond that, British Airways took significant measures to reduce additional risks, including taking measures that reduced their revenues and increased their costs, specifically giving away snack packs and hygiene kits, and by removing their for sale F&B offering. Indeed, it's tricky to see what else they could have done, short of leaving seats empty to better space passengers out. easyJet has chosen to maintain its revenues by selling speedy boarding and offering in-flight sales, even if this does marginally increase the infection risk by handling service items and mingling passengers. I'm not sure I can blame them for this, as they have experienced a massive reduction in revenues, and at least they did make an effort to control passengers getting off the plane. Ryanair and Wizz Air are offering an almost completely normal service. They are offering all the usual add-ons to maximise their revenues and don't appear to have adapted them in any way to take account of the current circumstances. Wizz Air did differentiate itself though by continuing to offer an in-flight magazine, Passengers weren't obligated to actually touch it, although I'm sure most of them did. So I'd rank the airlines in that order when it comes to mitigation measures, although in reality I think it makes very little difference, as all enforce mask use. I'd be happy to travel again on any of those airlines, and I hope to be able to do so again soon. So I promised some top tips. When it comes to masks, I did wear a fairly heavy-duty cloth mask, which did become a little uncomfortable after about 3 or 4 hours. When I next fly, I will wear a much lighter mask, such as those disposable hospital masks that you see. I will also add that I've never been offered a mask by any airport or airline. They may well have been available if you asked someone, but they weren't being freely distributed, so don't bank on collecting any when you travel. I'd also recommend using a mask extender to take the pressure off your ears, such as the one shown here. I'll link to a couple that are available in the description below. If you're uncomfortable with interacting with the crew or handling service items, or with surviving on just a BA snack pack on a long flight, then by all means take your own stuff. You'll then know where the items have been and can eat with confidence. And if you take an empty water bottle through security, all airports these days have water fountains where you can refill them. You'll also save a few quid. And finally, if you want to minimise crossover on board, take a seat right at the very back of the plane. BA will board you first, and as the other airlines almost always board from front and back, being in the back row will minimise the number of rows that you have to pass to access your seat. So there you go, and I do sincerely hope that this will all be irrelevant very, very quickly when vaccines get authorised. But, subject to government restrictions of course, travelling right now can be really, really rewarding. And if you've been to a restaurant or a bar or even a supermarket in recent months, then travelling on an aeroplane probably isn't any riskier. So please give this video a like if you've enjoyed it or got something from it. Subscribe if you're new, there's no charge, and most of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribed, so you're missing out. And leave me a comment. I'd love to hear if you have been travelling through this, if this video will make you change your mind at all, or if there is no way that you would get on the plane until you can see that everyone else on that plane has been vaccinated. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again soon. Goodbye.